Hello everyone. In my prior recording, I went through my documents which were listing all the builds that I felt were successful either in a pro setting or casual setting. I decided to take things a step further by doing a CDL breakdown. There was different builds involved in the CDL, and I think that it might have been confusing to some people. I want to clarify that for them, and while I'm at it, I'd like to share my thoughts on this as a person who has been reading this kind of data. So let's get started by breaking down the M4. When it comes to the M4, you'll see that it has very good range if you're using one of the barrels that increases range. Corvus has the least amount of range increase in comparison to the M16 barrel, but you're still talking about 4 shots to kill out to roughly 37.5 meters. This is going to be more than enough for most maps. For that reason, you will rarely see the M16 barrel. Well, and other reasons, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So let's go ahead, while we're talking about range, let's go ahead and just compare this to some other weapons. Here's the Bison. At 37.5 meters, it does take it 5 shots instead of 4 at 37.5 meters, but look at the time to kill. It's 182 milliseconds. The M4 is 216 milliseconds. Now, the Bison is pretty close to the Uzi in terms of range. So that means that either the Bison or the Uzi can compete with the M4 at range. Whether or not they're competitive at CDL level is a question for another day, but as you can see, there are viable alternatives to the M4. The reason I'm showing you this is I want to let you know that just because the pros do it doesn't mean it's always the best. It's what works for them, and it's what they've trained with. That's just what it is. But let's go and get back to the M4 discussion real quickly. I just wanted to show that to you. So we'll go over that in a minute. With the M4, we're going to go back to those range barrels, the Corvus. You can see that its stats are right here. It lowers your movement speed by 3% and increases your aim down sight time by 1 frame, which is roughly 16.67 milliseconds, according to Exclusive 8's maths. Now look at this. This is the M16 Grenadier. It's double the frames, and it decreases your movement speed by an additional 1%. So out of the two barrels, the Corvus is the better alternative. When you're watching the CDL or other ones, they're pretty easy to tell apart. The Corvus is going to be this one with the handguard looks to it. The Grenadier is going to be this ugly looking one with the holes in the side. So they're pretty easy to tell apart. So let's go on and talk about attachments now. For the CDL, it varies by player in each team, but I've noticed one commonality is the commando foregrip. The commando foregrip looks like this. It's got the somewhat triangular look and it pokes down from the underbarrel. The commando foregrip does have recoil stabilization, aiming stability, which is okay, but I don't think it's the best. Aiming stability really only affects your first shot. On automatic weapons, that doesn't matter all that much. Where aiming stability matters is with sniper rifles, marksman's EBR-14, for example. That's where aiming stability matters. Recoil compensation is good for automatics, but there's better. Let's look at this. So this is Exclusive Ace's testing on recoil attachments with the M4. You'll notice that out of this grouping, the most consistent of the recoil attachments was the compensator. It had a greater effect on the recoil than the commando foregrip. You can see that the base is all the way up here, so the commando foregrip really didn't take it down all that much. It's going to be a little bit better than rubberized grip or some of the others maybe, but compensator is your best bet when it comes to recoil control on the M4. Now, people continually tell me that recoil control in the M4 is not necessary, and I disagree strongly. Here's why. M4 has a headshot multiplier like most assault rifles. It has a multiplier of 1.6 times. Knowing that this can do 28 damage at its best optimal range, that means that you can increase that damage by quite a bit if you can just aim for the head. So I do think recoil attachments are important because you want to go for the head if you can help it. If you're in a situation where, it's an M4 versus an MP5, well, you're already outclassed because the MP5 has, I think it's 144 millisecond time to kill on 9mm, 146 on 10mm. The M4 is 216 milliseconds, so the MP5 is going to outkill you. If you're in that scenario where you just happen to have the M4 and you happen to run to an MP5, your best bet at winning is headshots, because that is how you make your time to kill that much faster. So I do think, coming back to this, that compensator is the most important thing. In addition to that, the commando foregrip does lower your movement speed, as it mentioned in the cons. Now, how much is hard to tell, because as with each attachment, the percentages or effects are always different. But you can see here that with these combined, it's a 7 to 8% reduction in your movement speed if you have all three of these on. Now we know the math for the Grenadier, which is 4%. The 60 round mags are 2 to 3, and commando foregrip is 2 to 3. So knowing the math from other videos, we can figure out that in this division, that it's possible that the M16 Grenadier is going to be 4% and these are 2, because 4, 6, 8, right? The M4 has 95% movement base, before you put any attachments on, so you're lowering it to 93% with commando foregrip. Knowing that these CDL players enjoy getting to positions quickly, I don't think commando foregrip is the answer for recoil stabilization. I think your answer is compensator, because of just how strong it is. Compensator will affect your ADS by roughly less than a frame. It's barely noticeable according to the community testers. That means that at the very worst, compensator can lower your ADS time by 8.335 seconds, which is not a big deal when you're talking about a 300 millisecond rifle. At base, that's what the M4 has for ADS speed, is 300 milliseconds. By the time that you do the builds that some of these people have, like CQS stock, stippled grip, and all that stuff, you bring it down to 200 milliseconds. You'll even see that in my document. It's at 200 milliseconds even with compensator on. So there's that. While we're on that, let's go ahead and talk about the stocks. When it comes to the stocks, the ADS time for no stock versus forge tack CQS is a noticeable difference by double frame. Problem is, no stock lowers your recoil control, which will make it a slight bit more difficult even with a compensator to hit the head. So I don't think that no stock is a good option, because there are other things that you can do to get your movement speed up while not hurting the weapon's ability to be a laser beam. An example is the M19. Again, this is exclusive Ace. He's one of the best testers in our community, COD community, that is. You'll notice that he figured out the knife and M19 pistol is 100% movement speed. That means the M19 pistol has the same movement speed as the knife. In my opinion, if you're going to use a weapon to get somewhere, I don't think it should be your primary weapon. I think you should be using the M19 pistol to get you within relative range of where you need to be, then pull out the M4 and go from there. With the build that I had done for the M4, I kept it at 95% movement speed, roundabout, somewhere around there. Or no, I'm sorry, 91, that's right, 91, because I put the 92. Yeah, 92, because I put the Corvus on there. So I kept the M4 at 92% movement speed despite all the attachments, which I think is a lot better than going below 90, which is what you would have done with the Commando foregrip. But there you have it. That's the M4 broken down for you. To recap, you will usually find Corpus Barrel and Commando foregrip, and then the stipple grip. Those are usually going to be your things. I'd like to make one more note here before we end the recording. The pros at times don't use optics, and people tell me that that's what you should do, but I disagree with that. Because the M4 does get that damage multiplier like I was pointing out earlier, I think it helps to have an optic, so you can see what you're doing and make corrections a lot easier if you're missing. That's the great thing with optics, is it gives you the ability to see clearly in terms of where your bullet is and where you're aiming at the enemy. You can actually change the optics color and pattern in the loadout screen. For even pros, that's an advantage because now you're changing your sight in such a way that you can see it easier. This applies to both Reflex and Holo sights. Now, as I pointed out in my document, there is a difference between Holo sights and Reflex sights. Reflex sights are neutral, they have no zoom. Holo sights do have some zoom. It's not going to be as much as, say, a Cronin C480 Pro optic, but it's just enough to give you a little bit of an idea as to where you're pointed. I personally think that when it comes to the optics, if you're going to be using a Reflex sight, you should be using GI Mini Reflex. It gives you an incredible amount of visibility. Yes, the pros in this CDL were using Viper sights, but I don't think Viper is the answer because it just blocks your vision on the sides a little bit too much in comparison to GI Mini Reflex. If you're going to be using a Holo sight, I think that you should be using the PBX7 Holo sight. It's kind of like the GI Mini Reflex in that it's fat on the sides, so you can get some visibility to your left and right side when zooming. If you don't like the GI Mini Reflex, I would say try the Solo Zero Mini Reflex sight. Solo Zero Mini Reflex sight is the one that you get at lower levels, whereas GI Mini Reflex is later levels. But that's all I have. Thanks for listening.